Hello and welcome to Wildcard Rewind. The draft might be over, but there's still plenty to talk about. So tonight we're going to go over our winners and losers. So let's get straight to it.
I just want to rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Hey, yeah, so here we are. I'm feeling a bit rusty actually as host. It's been quite a number of weeks, so I need to get back into it. But as usual, I'm back with my two co-hosts, Mags and Paul. Mags, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing really well. I enjoyed a nice sort of bank holiday, coronation day, whatever you want to call it. Nice day off today. So it's been a fairly chilled one. Really nice. And nice to have you back as a host, Hannah.
I know, it's felt like ages. And Paul, all right?
Yeah, enjoying a nice bank holiday coronation day in work because I don't get these glorious days off. But yeah, it is nice to have you back hosted. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has been a while, it has. And tonight we've got a fabulous returning guest, Lee. He's at Wakefield90 on Twitter. Great to have you back, Lee. Obviously, I wasn't here last time you came, so really excited to chat to you this week. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. I'm going to trump both the lads and say I've just come back off holiday, so I've been off for about a week. So bank holiday is just another day off for me, which is great. Wow. And great to be on with you guys again. Really enjoyed it last time, and yeah, good to see you, Hannah.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I'm really jealous. How did you go? Far away or?
It was a few days in Lisbon, Portugal, for us.
Oh,
yeah, it's nice.
Oh,
really
it's
nice.
right for so many.
I know, I'm very jealous. So shall we get straight to it? Obviously, last week we discussed round one and we reviewed everybody's predictions. So this week we're just going to go a little bit deeper, really, and look at who we think are the winners and losers from the draft, who had a good one, who had a bad one, and what that's going to mean for 2023 and beyond, really. So should we get straight to it, Lee? Please tell me, who is your draft winner?
Yeah, so to the delight, you can probably hear it in there, rubbing his hands together, to the delight of we just discussed before we hit record, of Paul. Yeah, my draft winners are the Cardinals. I feel like the Cardinals, for a team in their position, they really hit out the park. They got a good bunch of players in their first 5 picks, at key positions as well. The likes of Paris Johnson, BJ Ojolari, for example, coming in with their first 2 picks on the edge and with corner. Obviously, having a quarterback already kind of sewn up. We'll see in the future. We'll see, I guess. But and then moving forward and getting Garrett Williams, etc. in the first 5 picks, I thought was really, really solid for a team that really is building from the ground up almost. With this odd rebuild that they're going to go through with the quarterback already in place and not a lot else around him. So I think they formed a good skeleton of the roster moving forward. And are they going to be good next year? Probably not. But that's fine because where the Cardinals are undertaking their sort of rebuild from, as I've just mentioned. But the other aspect to this is how they accumulated picks and how the picks that they made were only part of the story. The way that the Cards maneuvered around the draft board, I thought was excellent. I thought they've obviously picked up a lot of extra ammo for the 2024 draft, and what they'll do with that is up to them, I guess, and gives them a lot of flexibility. It means that they pretty much control the draft next year. Picking up that extra first from the Texans, which probably likely to be another high pick, and an extra third, a couple of thirds, and an extra 5th as well. So they've got a lot of extra ammo to move around the draft board next year, and potentially move on a couple of pieces like, dare I say, that Kyler Murray next year, and DeAndre Hopkins potentially this year. Although we'll come on to maybe that a little bit later down the line. But the way they've got that flexibility really means that they really cemented themselves, and they could really control the draft, as I mentioned. So given it was the general manager's first draft, I think they did exceptionally well for both now and also the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with you there, Lee, to be honest. We know that they need a lot of pieces really on that roster. They pretty much, they aged out, to be honest, didn't they?
Yeah.
They had a lot of old veteran players on there. And unfortunately, it just didn't quite work out for them as they hoped. They didn't get particularly far in the playoffs the last couple of years. Obviously, Kyler got his injury. So, like you say, they're in that rebuild, which is a weird one, isn't it? Because they've kind of got the QB in place and now they're having to put everything else around, which is not usually how things go. But I think they did a great job, like you said, to be honest, in accumulating those picks, and having that Texans first is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah,
because obviously we've seen already Vegas kind of having where the season's kind of going to go, and the Cards and the Texans are at the bottom two. So potentially they do have the top two picks next year, which is going to be super duper interesting. I'm kind of really excited to
absolutely
see what happens there. Do you have a favourite player that they selected, Lee, or generally like the whole?
Well, I like I said, I kind of mentioned the first two in particular. I like that they got Paris Johnson, their left tackle of the future. They would have taken him at 3 by all accounts, managed to manoeuvre around from 12 then to 6 to still get their guy. So I think that's a great pick. He's a good tackle. He's not a groundbreaking tackle of the likes of, a few of the really good ones that have come out recently. The Chargers, Rashawn Slater for one, I'll just drop that in there. But I do like Ojulari as well. Good edge defender from LSU. Should have had a lot of speed to their defense on the edge there. So yeah, those first two in particular I thought were good picks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to ask Paul because we know he's going to say, "Oh, it's amazing! Everything they did was amazing." So I'll go to Mags. Mags, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. This is like a potential birth of like the new look Arizona Cardinals, right? There is, a chance that, this time next year, they could use these picks they've got. They could, as you say, Lee, trade away Kyler Murray, and you could roll into the 2024 season with the Arizona Cardinals starting Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. And that's incredibly exciting if you're a Cardinals fan. But, it does mean saying goodbye to Kyler Murray. And I don't know, are Cardinals fans there yet? I'm not sure. Paul, is that something you're ready to do?
Do you know what? It's like picking which child you love best. You know what I mean? It's like going out of your children. Who's your favorite?
He's not that small.
I know. But I love Kyler. I've defended Kyler and everything like this, and I've just actually looked, and he's under contract till 2029, and they don't have an out in his contract till 2028. So it is obviously a mega contract, and I just feel like, in realistic terms, is anyone going to take that contract? I don't know. Depends how Kyler plays this year, but yeah, it would be exciting to see Caleb Williams and Marvin Harris Jr. You know what I mean? That would be an exciting way to go, but I can kind of see us maybe doing what the Bears did this year with the 101 and just going, let's sell it for more.
Yeah.
I'm just doing that with it. You know what I mean? I don't know if anyone's going to take that contract that Kyler's got off our hands. So,
well, they'll certainly take us if that is the case. For Caleb Williams, they'll definitely take us for that pick right at the top.
But that's it. So people will pay over the odds to get that one, and if they can basically sell it and say, "Look, we've got these interested and these interested," we could potentially set ourselves up for the next, 3 drafts after that. So it's like Hannah said, it's going to be exciting to see where they go with it. Do they get rid of Kyler, take Caleb? Do they keep them picks? Do they trade them picks away? Do they set themselves up for the next 4 or 5 drafts after that? It's I don't know where they're going to go with it.
Do you know what would be the most Texans thing ever? Is if CJ Stroud flames out and the Texans are the ones to buy their own pick off of you next year for like a huge on top of what they got rid of it for.
Yeah, they give us Will Anderson Jr. in the trade as well.
Yeah,
Will Anderson Jr., their future first, another future first, and everything, just with Caleb Williams, But yeah, it is going to be exciting to see where we go and what we do with it. And I wanted somebody to mention the Cardinals because, like I said before we came on, I didn't want to be that guy that sits here and goes, "Oh, the team that did the best in the draft was my team," But I mentioned it last week, how many picks we left this year with so many extra picks and still picked up very, very good players. And I think we've had, we've got a new head coach, we've got a new general manager, and everything like this has all come in. And I think they've put the best foundation ever in. And, we're not a team that's heading to the playoffs this year. We're not. I wouldn't even like to sit here and say that we are. We're a long way off that. But we've got a foundation and we've got something to work with. And that to me is exactly what we needed in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be super interesting, isn't it? And to be honest, I'm really not expecting the Cardinals to do anything this season. So probably the most interesting thing to talk about the whole season is going to be what are they going to do in the next draft, really. The only question I have, obviously slightly going off topic, off the draft per se, is a little bit, Paul, what do you think about Buda Baker requesting a trade? Do you think that he just wants to go on a contender, or do you think he is unhappy on the team? Because that would scare me a little bit. It would make me nervous with a whole new kind of, people, front office and coaches, that if Buda Baker's not happy, who we know is kind of one of the main guys in the locker room, like, is there going to be some unhappiness in there, which is going to then affect how the team, the cohesion on the team, and, how they, perform, I suppose, for the new coaching staff?
Yeah, so it's difficult because do you remember when they came out and said Lamar Jackson requested a trade, and they actually came out like 3 weeks after he'd requested a trade to say, oh, he's requested a trade. They've done a similar thing here. He'd actually requested a trade a while back, and then it came out. And from what I can gather, from what I've seen from beat writers and stuff like that, all he wants more money. He's not per se going, oh, I want to go to a future Super Bowl winning team like the Cincinnati Bengals or the Philadelphia Eagles or somebody like that. He's not sitting there. They all want to. I've left him out on purpose, Mags. I've left him out on purpose. But he's not sitting there saying he wants. They all want to go to a team like that, but I'm trying to figure out when he signed his contract extension. He signed it in 2021, so he's still got another year on his contract, and he wants to, from what I can gather, he wants to extend it a little bit, and he wants more money, which is what all these players do, And I think the reporters kind of like blow it out of proportion. But if I'm honest, I love Buda Baker, and he's one of our captains, and he is a big personality in that change rooms. But I feel like the Cardinals, like from what we were talking about, are a team that's building, and they've put a foundation down and they're building. Now, if he's going to start demanding and wanting this, it wouldn't surprise me if they turn around and say, we're not going to pay you this. You can either go or see out you got whatever, you know what I mean? And they've got the picks to go after other players to replace them. You know what I mean? We've seen it with Patrick Peterson. I didn't want to see Patrick Peterson go, but actually, since he's left the Cardinals, he's gone to the Vikings. He was not good there, and now he's at the Steelers. And I loved him. I loved his personality. I loved everything about him. And it was just like, I kind of get the feeling that Buda Baker's doing the same thing. He wants more money. And I think they'll maybe extend him, but I don't think they'll pay him much more. I think he's going to cost them like 16 million this year or something like that. He's quite an expensive player. So I don't know. I don't worry too much about it. If he goes, he goes. If he stays, he stays.
Yeah, I always just think team building is it is quite an interesting one, really, because I do think there's a big component of it is how well the team gel, how well they get on with the coaches, to kind of build that team properly. And I think you want proper captains in your kind of locker room, and I think if he's not going to be that, then you should get rid of him. However, if he's going to be that veteran presence that kind of, they're going to bring in a lot of rookies in the next couple of years, they need some veterans there who are going to kind of bring everything together. And I think if he's going to still be a strong presence in the locker room for a positive, then I think I don't know whether he'll be worth paying or not, but he potentially is worth sticking around if he's going to, be a positive presence in the locker room.
Yeah,
but
agreed.
Obviously we don't know what happens behind the scenes, so we'll wait and see what happens there. I was just interested, because I just, there's a lot going on with the owner as well at the moment. There's a lot of kind of undercurrent with the Cardinals at the moment, and I'm just not quite sure exactly where they are in terms of, how cohesive the whole organization is, really.
Yeah, I think that's why the draft feels so much better than what it probably would have felt, because there's so much negative around with the owner and stuff like that at the moment, and we've had this draft. It feels like, I don't know, it just feels like it's the uplift that we needed and stuff like that, but I don't know, I think there's more to come with this owner and what's going on there. I'm not looking forward to all that coming out, to be fair.
Yeah, we'll see how things go. So, Mags, let's have a move on to your draft winner. So, who is it?
Yeah, I just kind of went fairly straightforward with this one. It was a team that, had pretty obvious issues, and they just went out and they addressed all of these issues. It's Pittsburgh Steelers. They, had a horrendous offensive line. I mean, they still probably do have a horrendous offensive line, but they've at least, tried to address that. They brought in Broderick Jones in the first round. Then I say they had a second round pick in Joey Porter Jr., but he was pretty much a first round pick because, the Miami Dolphins forfeited that pick. So I think Porter Jr. was like the first pick in the second round. So technically like the 32nd player. So pretty much a first round pick. Of course, his dad played for the Steelers as well, which is always quite cool, right? Whenever you get a father-son, like there's pictures of like him in the locker room when he was a kid, like in a Steelers uniform with his dad. Like, I think if I was a Steelers fan, I'd be delighted with that kind of like legacy living on at the club. So I think they got to be really pleased with that. A guy that's kind of going under the radar because everyone in the fantasy community is so furious with this landing spot is Darnell Washington. Obviously, if you play fantasy, you're not going to touch him now, but he's probably the best tight end that the Steelers could have selected here because he's going to help bolster that offensive line more than any of the other guys. This is a guy that was, sort of heavily projected to be a first round pick for a long time, and to snag him in the third round, I think is really, really good. And I think he's the perfect fit. You're not going to ask Freiermuth to do too much blocking, although he's a pretty decent blocker. You've got Washington now to do the heavy lifting, and we all seen him pushing that sled at the combine. It was unbelievable. So to add him into that offensive line is going to really, really boost their team needs. And yeah, they went across. They got Keanu Benton. They got Nick Herbig, who I think his brother either still does or certainly played for the Steelers last year. And then, they just added a few more. Spence Anderson for the O-line, more bolstered there. And then Corey Trice, real name, no gimmicks. That's an Eminem joke.
I love it. Sorry.
Terrible jokes tonight. Terrible.
Yeah.
I struggle a bit to talk about the Steelers because they're obviously another AFC North team, so I don't like it when they do particularly. But what are your thoughts, Lee?
Yeah, I think Max is spot on with shouting them out as one of the teams that did, one of the best drafts the last few weeks. So to go up there and get Broderick Jones and jump ahead and make that trade was really, really important because that was pretty much the last defensive tackle on in that level, in that sort of tier. And they went ahead and got it, made that trade up, and that's really, really important because Mags is right. Their offensive line's still bad. But I was on a podcast pre-draft and we were going through the Steelers with who I was talking to, and I was actually saying that I actually didn't recognise who their left tackle was at the time, which is really bad because I'd count myself as a pretty knowledgeable fan. And I was like, I'm not really sure I've heard of this guy, or I'm not really too aware of him. And so that just says a lot, doesn't it? And I think to carry on with and kind of piggyback on what Mags was saying, Darnell Washington is pretty much one of the picks of the draft in the middle of the draft for me. To get him in the late third round as well, not just the third round, but for me, he was one of my favourite players in the draft. I think he can give you so much. In the run game immediately, and just put the fantasy perspective on it. If you've got the shares in Najee Harris, I think they're more valuable now because of his blocking skills and how him and Freiermuth can be a bit more of a tandem in 12 personnel and things like that as they move forward. But I also think Washington's got really high upside in the passing game. I think it'll take a couple of years to develop and come to fruition, but I do think that'll come out. I'm a big believer of his, and like you say, to get him in the third round is an absolute steal. And Corey Trice, I won't make the same joke again, but he without the injury, he'd have been in the fourth, fifth round, quite easily at the start of day 3 rather than that right at the end of it. And I think he's a really good pickup from Purdue as a nickel corner. But I think it's a solid draft. Unfortunately, it's another AFC team that's had a decent draft, which is a shame. I'll kind of say the same as you, Hannah. It's hats off to them. And they'll get coached up well as well because Tomlin is a genius at the end of the day, isn't he?
Yeah, and obviously we know that it was Omar Khan's first draft as GM. Their long-time GM retired, earlier in the year. So, I mean, it's quite promising, really, to see him do so, hopefully, so well in the draft. It'll just be really interesting to see, how Tomlin uses everyone. And isn't it a great story, Joey Porter Jr.? I mean, I think we all kind of wanted him to go there just because of his dad. So I think that's really nice that he got to kind of reunite with the Steelers, keep it in the family. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go. Look, I think that this season is going to be a big one for Kenny Pickett.
Yeah,
I know they haven't added any, kind of pass catchers per se, but I mean, they have a decent wide receiver room anyway, so they don't particularly need it. But I think, they're going to want to see what they've got in him properly now. He'll have a full off season, of practice and training and whatever. So I think they want to know, right, is Kenny Pickett the QB we want to move forward with at the end of this season? So I think, trying to get that O-line in a decent state is important so that you can evaluate him properly. So it'll be really interesting to see how this season goes, and hopefully these rookies can contribute. And the only thing I was disappointed with, not draft wise, but the fact that they've still got the same offensive coordinator, really, I think that is a shame, and I think that will affect their ability to see how good Kenny Pickett is, because I don't like the offensive coordinator. I think he has very boring plays, but we'll see. Maybe if he knows his bum's on the hot seat, he might play a bit better, and scheme things up a bit better too. So Paul, we'll come to you finally. Who are your draft winners?
So I didn't want to sound really chalky with this, but it was the Eagles.
Yeah.
And as much as we all want to pick a winner and everything like that, the Eagles left day one with Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith, and that to me was just, even when we say it now, you just say like, how did they end up with this? And I was looking at the PFF big board rankings that they do and stuff like that. Does anyone want to know where Jalen Carter was on this big board? Anyone want to take a guess?
3.
He was 2, so he was their second best ranked player. Anyone want to have a guess on where Nolan Smith was?
It's like 12 or something like that.
Oh, you're
not 30th.
He was 13th. So PFF have done all of this, and I'm not saying they're right or wrong or whatever they are. They've made their rankings and everything like that. But the Eagles somehow convinced the whole of the NFL to leave the PFF second best player to pick 9, and then went, can you leave their 30 for the 30th pick? So 29 teams went, we won't take him, we'll leave him because the Eagles need him. They need him in their team. And I'm just like, I still don't know how they managed to, and they traded up as well, didn't they? They traded
bullied the Bears into that
in front of the Bears, didn't they? So they could get that. And it was like, you just, I don't know. I just, even just looking at it now, you're just like, how did they do this? I don't know how they did this, but somehow the Eagles walked out of day one with 2 of the top 15 players. And then they came back and they didn't have any second round picks. They managed to pick Tyler Steen and Sidney Brown. Now Sidney Brown is a safety I'm looking forward to seeing. I liked him coming into this, so he is a player that I'm excited to see. And then they decided, do you know what we'll do then? We'll add a running back because the Detroit Lions are giving away one, and then paid a 5th round pick for DeAndre Swift and added him to the team. And you're just going, did you guys see what this team did last year? Did you see that they went to the Super Bowl and nearly beat the Kansas City Chiefs? So you thought, do you know what we'll do? We'll make it really easy for them in the draft, and then we'll sell them a really good running back for a 5th round pick. There is nobody in the 5th round that even comes close to the level that DeAndre Swift can be. You know what I mean? Do you know what? It just frustrates me because we're looking at a team now that for the next 2 years, I'd say, are a team that I could genuinely see in the next 2 Super Bowls. You know what I mean?
I think they were lucky though, right? Obviously, Jalen Carter would no way have been there at 9 had there not been some issues, as we all have heard and seen. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I know they moved up to get him, but everyone else did not feel that he, feel comfortable with taking him, based on his history. So they were lucky there, because he would not have been there had there not have been question marks over his kind of personality and things. And that they have taken a bit of a risk with him there.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, obviously, he's surrounded by all of his teammates from Georgia, because that's all they seem to like to draft. So, I mean, I'm sure he will, settle. And I know the Eagles, I'm sure he'll play amazing, and we'll all be mad that they drafted him and no one else did. But there is a slight risk to that he could, potentially bust if he, continues down some of the tracks that we know that he's been down. Nolan Smith, again, I think he is great, but I do think he is a certain kind of scheme fit, and that's not for everyone. So I don't think necessarily every team would have had an interest with him. As I say, I think they're lucky that he fell all the way to 30, but I don't necessarily think he was suitable for every team. So again, I think they were lucky with them both, but I think there's reasons why they got them both as well. I don't know what you think about that, Lee.
Yeah, I think you're right. And exactly what you've just said. Obviously, there's the well-documented problems with Jalen Carter, and you bang on again. Nolan Smith's just not for everyone. He's too light to play in some schemes. He's not going to be a hand in the dirt defensive end for anyone. He's a stand-up linebacker who's going to rush from the edge, and he might be able to play some off-ball linebacker, which isn't going to suit everyone, of course. But I think that, just going back to what you said about the Georgia connection with all these players, I think Nolan Smith gives a lot of leadership. He was renowned as being the leader of that team, the best defense in college football history, some might say. And we saw it in Jalen Carter's pro day when he was really struggling. Nolan Smith was the one picking him up, G'ing him up, and that support system is going to follow him to Philadelphia, with John Davis there from the year before and Nakobe Dean as well. So they can probably think and be safe in the knowledge that they've got that support system around Jalen Carter to the point where he's probably going to be okay. And if it's not the case, then it's not the case. And, some draft picks bust without these problems anyway. So, you kind of, even if you pick in the 9th overall pick, you're still not guaranteed to get a good player every single time. But his talent's out of this world, and, it's just a super team, isn't it? We all kind of alluded to it while talking about the Eagles. And I just think that, like kind of what Paul was alluding to, really, they're going to walk into the NFC Championship game at the very least. They're a 15-win team for me with in the weak NFC. So it's really difficult, and it's really difficult to imagine how and why the NFL allowed it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. This is maybe one of the only times when I'm glad they're in the NFC and my team is in the AFC, and potentially only have to meet them in the Super Bowl.
It's like one of those questions, isn't it? Of would you rather fight this massive animal or 100 of these little animals? That's the AFC and NFC kind of mixed together, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did it again, didn't he? He seems to do amazingly well, Howie. For the past few years anyway, he seems to have kind of hit gold with everything that he's drafted. So obviously we don't know that that's the case with all of these, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't. And like you say, they get DeAndre Swift at a steal as well. So really interesting to see them be the juggernaut of the NFC again. So we've had a good chat about some of our winners. Should we move on to our losers? So Lee, who is your draft loser?
So this could be slightly controversial in some circles. I suppose fantasy circles might look on this as quite a controversial shout, but my draft loser is the Atlanta Falcons, because I know that they're being unapologetic of themselves. They're playing for themselves and they're drafting for themselves, which is absolutely fine. But when you look back at Bijan Robinson with the 8th pick overall, for a team that needs so much, we're not talking about a team that's that much better on paper than the Cardinals were. And obviously they went around in a completely different fashion. To go back a couple of years, they've picked Bijan, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London with the first round picks, and their quarterback's Desmond Ridder. Their defense outside of the secondary is pretty shocking. I know they want to run the ball, and they were going to make Bijan the centerpiece of their offense. Desmond Ridder is almost like secondary, which is kind of weird because he's the quarterback, and they're still going to want to run the ball a lot, but they don't have any sort of tight end. Like I'll say a proper tight end, because Kyle Pitts is not really a tight end, is he? Let's be honest. And their wide receiver depth behind London and Kyle Pitts is non-existent almost. So as much as they have got 3 great stars, at all these positions, these skill positions, there's not a lot of substance behind that, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. This group of young stars is going to have to put up a lot of points for the quarterback who's starting for the first time, and I just don't think it's great skill. It's not great team building. We were talking about team building a second ago and how important that is, and landing spot is really, really important. Bijan's obviously in a great landing spot, so I do want to preface it and caveat it with that. But I just think this is really bad process to go ahead and take a running back with the 8th overall pick, when really you're a couple of injuries away from not having a great deal because your depth's so bad. And there's talk of trading and with other teams and trading with the Falcons as well at 8 and allowing another team to take Bijan at this position. And they went ahead and did it. And they've backed themselves into a corner. They've backed themselves to be a good and fun offensive team, which I'm sure they will be at some point. But this team needs a lot, and I don't think it's the best way to go about it. So I think long term they'll be a big, big loser from this.
Yeah, I agree. It was great fun to see Bijan go to Falcons. We know that he is going to be all over the field and he's going to touch the ball many times. It's going to be great to watch, but I totally agree that it just does not feel like good process. The last 3 drafts, as you said, they haven't really picked, what you would call these kind of important, positions. They've gone with really luxury picks, which doesn't really feel like they're in the position to do that, especially when their defense is or has been particularly terrible. I also find it weird that they paid Jesse Bates, an absolute fortune as a safety. Great, he might be a captain, good veteran, captain or whatever, veteran, keeping everyone together, great. But is he worth that much money when you have so many other kind of holes in your roster, which you haven't really even filled in the draft? This offense is going to have to put up a lot of points anyway, because the defense is just not going to be able to, stop anybody. So I agree. I think it's very poor process, to be honest. What do you think, Paul? Would you agree with us, or do you think this is great? I love it.
No, so I actually said last week I don't think this was a great pick, and I think fantasy wise, we can all sit here fantasy wise and say that was a great landing spot for Bijan Robinson. He's now with Arthur Smith. Is it Arthur Smith, the head coach? Yeah. Who's done this all with Derrick Henry, and you're like, oh my god, this is to the moon. We love Bijan and everything like that. But to actually, I've got the Falcons draft history here, and since 2018, they've taken Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson all in the first round. And Calvin Ridley was picked 26, so that was obviously a late first round pick. But Kyle Pitts was the 4th overall. Drake London was the 8th overall. Bijan Robinson was the 8th overall. So you kind of see a pattern forming here. They're taking these really good players, and don't get me wrong, it's the offensive side of the ball, mate. You're looking at Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson. You're going, oh, that's amazing. All they need is a QB now. But the other side of the ball is they've got so many gaps. And I said this, that, they could have taken, I know we said Jalen Carter was a risk and everything like that, but they could have taken Jalen Carter at 8 because he was on the board, and not taken Bijan and start building something, start building a team on both sides of the ball. And so I agree with you, Lee. I think they were like losers in this draft. And I know, I don't want to say it, but I kind of feel like their manager is playing fantasy and he's going, oh, Bijan's fallen to the 8th. I'm smashing that pick. Let's go, Bijan. I'm drafting him right now, and it is, if I was a Falcons fan, I'd be like, oh, we got Bijan Robinson. I'd have loved him at the Cards and everything like this. But we were never in a position to draft it. It wouldn't have been a smart draft pick. And I think the Falcons have done that now 3 years in a row. They've got to their pick and gone, Kyle Pitts is still there. I'm going to take Kyle Pitts. He's a freak. He's, a generational talent. Cool. And then Drake London was one of the best wide receivers in last year's class. Oh, he's there. We're going to take him. And then this year it's Bijan Robinson. Oh, he's a generational talent. Let's take him. And you go, who's going to throw him the ball? It's good if you can score 3 touchdowns, but if you concede in 6, it's not great. You know what I mean? And that I think they had so many, like you said, so many gaps to fill. I think Bijan was actually not the smart pick to make in round 1. And that's to me, that's one of the big reasons why they're going to lose this draft. You know what I mean? They had the ability to go and get great players, and they took Bijan, who is a great player. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying he's not a great player, but yeah.
Yeah, they're interesting, aren't they? I mean, in that draft where they took Kyle Pitts 4th overall, the Bengals took Jamar Chase at 5. Like they took Kyle Pitts, and obviously we know he's amazingly talented, but I don't feel they've necessarily used him to that talent per se. And they could have had Jamar Chase, who I think would have been more impactful for their team than Kyle Pitts has been. I mean, to be honest, he probably potentially should or could have taken someone else, more foundational piece rather than one of these luxuries. But as I say, if you want to go that way on the offense, it seems silly to me that you would pass over Jamar Chase and pick Kyle Pitts when, we know what Jamar Chase did when he went to the Bengals and how much of an impact he had, even though we had quite a lot of holes on our offensive line, particularly. So I think they've made some interesting decisions. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think they've been kind of lucky in that they've been in this like multi-year rebuild. So there hasn't really been any impact yet of these selections. But I think the longer it takes for them to kind of rebuild, I think more of an impact we're going to see, with the potentially bad decisions that they've made. So interesting one to kind of track, really. But I think they're going to be great fun to watch this season. So we'll be talking about them.
High scoring games, that's for sure. They're always going to score touchdowns, but they're going to concede them at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mags, you hinted last week kind of your loser when we were on the show last week. So I'm slightly surprised that you're still on this, but who is your draft loser for this draft?
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned it last week. I have sort of calmed slightly from them, but I still want to, talk about, the Kansas City Chiefs. And my main thing was going into the draft, there were 3 things. I was like, right, we need to address offensive line. We need to address wide receiver. And we need to probably address running back as well. And I just was like, I kind of came out of it a bit like underwhelmed. While I did really like the pick of, the new king in town, King Felix is in town in Kansas City. I did like that. At the end of the draft, he played football in Kansas, which is obviously, not quite on that Joey Porter Jr. kind of level, but the fans do appreciate that. He's kind of a local kind of guy. He's used to, not quite the area, but close to the area. But I also I feel like we moved up in rounds 2 and moved up in rounds 3, and it's just like, can we not have moved up in round 1, guys? Can we not have just put together all the pieces we used to move up in these other rounds and use that to move up in round 1 and to get, someone either on that offensive line, or while the offensive line class wasn't brilliant this year, maybe there wasn't anybody there, but there were definitely some wide receivers there who were, far better than Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is fine. Rashee Rice might fill in some of the stuff that Juju Smith-Schuster did last year, kind of in a similar-ish mold. But he's not, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, you had to move up 11 spots to go get Jackson Smith and Jigba. I just feel like a deal with the Seahawks was there to be made, and I still feel a bit flat about that. But at the same time, King Felix, I feel like he was maybe plan C, plan D, plan E. He was kind of there. Let's just take him. And I mean, the rest of the draft, we talked about Rashee Rice. He's okay. He's fine. I'm sure he'll do an okay job. We got Morris and Connor and Coburn. They're kind of classic, Steve Spagnuolo, Andy Reid picks where they're really versatile. They can be used in different parts of the field. They'll move all over. They can play different positions. Yeah, I just came out of it. I was kind of like, Sky Moore last year excited me a bit, but maybe this year, because I'm not excited, it'll be good. I don't know. I trust Brett Veach. I trust Andy Reid. I trust everyone in that organization, obviously, but I've heard this, I'm not underwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm like whelmed, right? Just yeah, it's just kind of. I did want more, yeah, and well, the team is still really good. I'm just like, could have been better.
You sound like the film Draft Day, where he goes, teams need to, people pay to get wet. You need to go and make a splash in the draft, and you haven't made a splash in the draft. And you haven't walked away with somebody that you've gone, oh, I love him, and now you're going,
yeah.
But didn't the Chiefs hit on 6 of their 7 picks last year, weren't they? Starting with it, like in the Super Bowl when you won it, when they started.
Exactly.
So trust the system, trust the process.
I do trust the system, but I also like shiny toys, not like toys that yeah.
You want a new person to put behind you, do you?
Yeah, I want like a PlayStation, not like a Rubik's Cube, right? It's just something that's
I do wonder though. Obviously, it was hosted in Kansas City, and they were the last pick in the first round. I do wonder if it was not in Kansas City. I wonder whether they would have traded out of that pick, and back into the second round. I think they felt pressure to pick there because obviously everyone was here. They want to sit. The whole reason they're there is to see Kansas City pick. Yeah, woo! And then obviously for them to not pick on day one, I think they would just let everyone down. So I think they felt like they had to stay in, because I had heard there was a lot of teams wanting to kind of come back into the end of that first round, and obviously they never managed to do that. And as I say, I do wonder whether they were like, this wasn't exactly how we expected, or the people, the players who wanted are not here. I think in a normal year, I think they would have, I suspect they would have traded out of that first round.
Yeah, they had fireworks ready, like red fireworks ready to launch after the draft was over. Like the pick, that kind of like, you don't have those ready to go if you're planning to trade out, I suppose, right?
Yeah, so I think they were a little bit between a rock and a hard place there. Lee, what did you think of the Chiefs kind of draft? Because obviously there's been a lot of discussion about, these are the winners, these are losers, but Chiefs have, from what I've seen, kind of nationally, not particularly been in the kind of losing column. But obviously everyone has their different opinions. What are your thoughts?
I think it was fine. It was encouraging from my point of view as a Chargers fan, because I didn't think they knocked out the park. And it was one of them where you
That's
look
a
at
polite way of saying it was shit.
But you look at it and you think,
you can say whatever you want.
They've done fine. It wasn't terrible. I like Felix. Rishi Rice is a player that I might have wanted the Chargers to draft in the 3rd or 4th round. So from that point of view, maybe it was a bit of a reach. And there was other wide receivers that might have gone before that I probably might have preferred over him, and some ones that went after as well, but that's just me. So generally speaking, it's fine. I mean, I was on with the lads a few weeks ago, wasn't I? And I called Patrick Mahomes the multiplier. So you kind of don't need to be that great on the offensive line. He kind of gets himself out of so much trouble. And I know that we're not here to talk about free agent signings, but they've picked up Donovan Smith, they've got Juwan Taylor, they picked up Wanya Morris, and none of them are great, but Mahomes will get himself out of it anyway. So it's going to be fine for them. Do you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it encouraged me because they didn't knock it out of the park. I think you're right, Hannah. They definitely took some calls. I think the Titans were one that wanted to come up and get Will Levis in the first round, but obviously they said no for probably the reasons that you're saying. And that's obviously a positive as well, because it doesn't allow them to make more picks and accumulate more capital. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't think it was a dreadful draft. I don't think they've completely whiffed on any of their picks. I just don't think they kind of got some difference makers at the same time. But they're ahead of the game, obviously, in the AFC anyway. So it's kind of maybe levels the playing field in the opposite way that we were talking about the NFC and the Eagles getting ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting, ever since they traded away Tyreek Hill, they've kind of had this kind of hodgepodge of wide receiver room.
Yeah.
And I actually thought maybe this draft would be kind of where they cemented it a bit more as to, what we were expecting from the room, if you know what I mean. But even after the draft, it still feels a little bit like hodgepodge.
Yeah.
They won the Super Bowl with it, but I'm waiting for them to kind of make their move to be like, this is our future, wide receiver.
It talks about it pre-draft, Hopkins is a chief, and then obviously, they come out and they say, no, he's a Cardinal, so whether that be the move that they make, whether they'll be able to do that, whether the Cardinals want to, but you're right, Hannah, they need a guy, right? They need a wide receiver, a dominant wide receiver who's going to scare people, and they just don't really have that. They've got the scary quarterback and the tight end as well.
Yeah, what I was going to say was DeAndre Hopkins as well came out and made a video, didn't he, when he was staying at the Cardinals, and he was like, who said I ever wanted to leave? And it was like, you. You said you wanted to leave.
Wasn't that the whole video where it was like, oh, give us a smile if you want to go to the Bills. Give us if you don't want to go to this team. And it was like a whole thing.
Yeah, and it was who said I wanted to leave? And it's like, you, mate, but
yeah, interesting. So go on then, Paul, give us your draft Are we on losers? We're on losers.
Yeah, yeah.
On the
We're on
losers.
losers.
Yeah.
Give us a loser.
So I just wanted to say a quick thing about when you were saying Titans wanted to trade up for Will Levis. I love the fact that the Chiefs said no because we spent a couple of $1,000 on fireworks, mate. And we're making our pick because we're setting these fireworks off. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You can't have fireworks for Will Levis. Come on.
You know what I mean? The Titans trade up. Here's our red fireworks for the So again, a bit like what you were saying, Lee. This may be a bit of a controversial thing, but I think one of the big losers were the Texans. Now, I think they got CJ Stroud and then they moved up and took Will Anderson Jr. And I think that's where it sort of ended for me. And I think they did well with them first two picks, but they've committed a lot to it. We mentioned it earlier. If things don't go right there, they could be potentially the Cardinals are picking up the 101 next year from the Texans, and they've given that up for now. And I think that they've paid a lot for two players. I think I don't know. I just think this whole process and what they've done, it was exciting to see, and they made that splash. As we were just saying, they obviously took CJ Stroud and reduced the value of that pick 3, and then traded up for the pick 3 and everything like this. But then after that, it just felt a bit, I don't know. I don't know if I'm maybe looking at it in the sense of they were all obviously mocked CJ Stroud and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and we'd have all loved to have seen that pairing together and stuff like that. But I just feel like after them first two picks, I kind of feel like it all went a bit downhill, and I don't think they've really addressed the rest of the holes that they've got. They didn't take a running back, did they? They didn't take a running back in this draft. So you may have to help me here. I can't remember his name. The running back of the Texans, Damian Pierce. That's the one. So they've got this shiny QB. They've got this shiny, edge rusher and stuff like this. And all of a sudden you're going, you're still not a great team. And you've given up so much of your future to get them two good players. And if it all goes wrong, they could be in the shit. And I feel like they've put a lot of, what do they call it? A lot of eggs in their basket, and it could go very wrong for them. But that's just my opinion. Go on, criticize me.
Yeah, I saw your face, Lee, when Paul announced that it was the Texans. So I'm interested to see your thoughts there. It potentially might be a bit different, Paul.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit. I actually really liked how they made a big ballsy swing, and they took their quarterback in the future, which was something that was kind of rumored throughout the draft cycle one way, then the other. Then it went back, and they got their quarterback. And I love then how they came back and they did get that edge rusher. They got their guy for D'Amico Ryans, and kind of went ahead and nailed the close to the mast, really. I do agree with Paul to the extent that I don't love the rest of their draft. They got a couple of starters. They got Juice Scruggs, who they got in the second round, who will be a centre. Centre's really important. Their offensive line, for a team that's this bad, is actually looking relatively decent, with Kenyon Green and Shaq Mason, who they've acquired in the last couple of years, and obviously Larry Tunsil staying in town, sort of against all the odds, maybe. And they also got Tank Dell, who came from the University of Houston as well. And they don't have a great roster. I'm not trying to make it out like they do, but they have a reasonable offense, and they are building things on defense. And they've got obviously the defensive coordinator who's come over from their now head coach, who was the defensive coordinator for the 49ers. And as much as the trade was expensive, like I said, I'm glad that they nailed the calls to the mast. Maybe they're trying to accelerate that process. And they've still got the Browns first for next year from the Deshaun Watson trade. So they've done that move, and they've still got, as much as it won't be as high as what they would be getting themselves, they've still got probably what will be a mid-first round pick next year. So it's not like they've mortgaged the whole future away. So I don't think it's as terrible as what Paul's making out. And at the end of the day, they're still not going to be good immediately. It goes back to what we were saying about the Cardinals earlier on. They're not trying to be good immediately this year. And maybe they still start the clock on D'Amico Ryans. But at the end of the day, they've got their quarterback. They've got their cornerstone on defense. And like I said before, the roster's not dreadful. They've got a lot of one-year deals, and they'll kind of throw in what mud at the wall they can and see what sticks, I guess, before they extend a few of those guys and let ones go. But I don't think it's terrible. I think it's a decent draft and a bold strategy, which I like. It's kind of the Bijan Robinson going to the Falcons, right, in a different sense, but I like it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I do think if they didn't have D'Amico Ryans, they probably wouldn't have traded back up to third. I mean,
100%.
Technically, I think he wanted, the defensive player, and I think everyone else said we need to get a QB because we don't have anybody on the roster, and we may not ever be in this position again. Although I think we all suspect they would. But I do think, defensive, wise, I think D'Amico Ryan's going to coach them up really well. I think they're going to play hard. And I think it's kind of nice to have their kind of young, potentially captains on each side of the ball as kind of the team builds through. But like you say, really, they have to be successful picks for that to work. And it will be interesting to see how things go. I think it definitely feels so much more positive, that team. The last couple of years, it's just been, I think, really depressing, the Deshaun Watson stuff, they just have looked a bit incompetent at times with all sorts of different things. And I think for the first time in ages, it kind of feels a bit more positive for them. And like you say, they do still have a first round pick next year. If their pick ends up being like the first or second pick in the draft, it kind of feels like you're giving up a lot, for that defensive player. But at least you've still got a first round pick, I suppose. And I think that's motivation to try and be semi-decent this year and not have that first round pick be the 101 or the 102.
Yeah.
Whether they'll be able to do that or not, I don't know, because, as we've all said, they've still got multiple holes in the roster. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how things go and how CJ Stroud plays, etc., etc. So I think they're actually quite intriguing. The last couple of years I've kind of ignored them just because they've been so bad and they've been so dysfunctional. But for the first time, I think they're going to be kind of interesting this season. Interesting to see how things go there. So guys, obviously this wouldn't be Wildcard Rewind without some predictions. So before we finish, I think it'd be cool for us to kind of fast forward to the end of the 2023 season and see who we kind of have picked as our offensive and defensive rookie of the year. So let's start with the offensive side. So Lee, do you have a prediction for who may be offensive rookie of the year?
Yeah, so I'm going to be a complete hypocrite and go for Bijan Robinson. Because like we've all said, he's going to get so many touches of the ball. Then that offense, if they do all sit together and there's not loads of injuries, they will put up points. They will be exciting. And that is what these awards are given out for, right? They're given out for the flashiest things. And I'll come on to that with my next one as well when we go for defense as well. But yeah, Bijan's going to be a really exciting player. Like I said, I don't think it's great team building, but for this year, which is all we're asking for the offensive rookie of the year, he's going to be really exciting and score loads of touchdowns and make loads of good plays that's going to make people sit up and take notice. And none of these people who vote for these things watch every game. They watch the highlights, and when you see a bunch of highlights for number 7, which is kind of weird, he's going to be offensive rookie of the year for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout, really. What about you, Mags?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Anthony Richardson to win offensive rookie because I think if he hits, nobody's, not even Bijan's going to come close to winning, like sniffing that award. If Anthony Richardson, hits that ceiling that he has, he could win MVP. Like if he hits the ceiling that he has, he's that talented, that good. So yeah, I'll just bank on him hitting, and yeah, he could be offensive rookie of the year.
Paul?
So I'm going to say Bryce Young. It's very chalky. He was the 101. He's the first quarterback off the board. I agree with what the other two have said, but Bryce Young, I think he just needs to turn up for 16 or 17 games, and I think he's somebody that's probably one of the favored to take the MVP. As we all know, he's the first one off the board. So Bryce Young for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, it's going to be one of these QBs, or Bijan's going to, be amazing, and they're not going to be able to give it to a QB. I mean, I think Bijan is going to have to be super superb to get it and not a QB. So I'm going to be a bit different to everyone else, really, just so I'm not boring. So I'm going to say the third QB in the top 5 of this draft. So I'm going to say CJ Stroud. Look, if he plays decent and the Texans actually end up not being kind of in the bottom 3 or 4 in the league, I think there's a good chance that he ends up taking it home. So you never know. So let's have a look over at the defense. So Lee, who do you pip for Defensive Rookie of the Year?
So kind of going back to what I said a minute ago about it all being about flashy plays. This is a pick that I actually really hated in real life, which is kind of the theme for most of my award picks here, I guess. But I'm going to go for Emmanuel Forbes for the Commanders. He just gets interceptions, and that's his game. And if he pulls off a bunch of interceptions in the league and carries on his streak that he's been on since high school for getting multiple interceptions in a season, then I don't think there's going to be many players that can touch him. I don't really see anyone who's going to get a bunch of sacks. So I've kind of deferred to interceptions as being my flashy stat that they're going to go for. And I think Emmanuel Forbes will get the most out of the rookies. So he's my pick.
Sounds fair. Max?
Mine's kind of a bit, I don't know. I'm kind of playing like what ifs in my head a little bit. I'm actually going to go with Nolan Smith. And the what ifs is you can't double team everybody, right? You're probably thinking, right, who are we going to leave on single coverage? It's probably going to be Nolan Smith in that defense. So yeah, I'm going to go with Nolan Smith because I think he's going to have the easiest task of getting to the quarterback in that Eagles defense.
What about you, Paul? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say Nolan Smith, and I actually changed Mags's answer on the show sheet to John Smith, hoping he'd just read it and just say John Smith.
I'm like Ron Burgundy. I'll just read anything that's on there. So, fuck yourself, San Diego.
Yeah. So I was going to say Nolan Smith, so I'm going to use Lee's sort of analogy here, and I'm going to say Devon Witherspoon, and I'm going to say he's going to, if we're going to go off interceptions, then he could be a guy that shines in that Seahawks defense. So I'm going to say him.
Yep, fair shout. I think this guy is going to have to really step up to be worth what he was in the draft. So I'm going to say Will Anderson. He needs to really start setting that edge quickly and early to show that he was worth what they traded for him, and also to kind of set the tone on that defense. So I'm going to go Will Anderson, a bit chalky, I suppose, based on where he went. But, I think there's a good probability it ends up being one of yours, really. So interesting.
Shall I take the hint, Hannah? Who's your draft losers? The Texans. Who's your offensive rookie of the year? CJ Stroud. Who's your defensive rookie of the year? Will Anderson Jr. Shall I take the hint? You've heard what I've said and gone, Paul's always wrong. I'll say these two.
No, it's not my fault, Paul, that you are always wrong.
I try my best. It's a taking part that counts.
I would actually love it if they now became offensive and defensive rookie of the year. Yeah. But anyway. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. We've really, really enjoyed having you on again. Is there anything that you would like to plug before we finish? Anything you're up to? Anything coming up for you?
So as you shouted out on the beginning of the podcast, my personal Twitter is @Wakefield90. I'm actually just going to plug myself, actually, because I'm actually a free agent in terms of podcasts now. I'm not actually affiliated with anyone that I'm writing with anymore. I'm not actually podcasting with anyone at the minute. So if anyone wants to get a new co-host or something like that, then come and get me. That's what I'm going to say.
Excellent.
We'll have you back anytime, Lee.
I'd love to come on. It's been a blast again.
You're always welcome. We loved having you on. So that comes to the end of the show. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to us and follow on Twitter @Wildcard Rewind. And as usual, we'll have some awesome content for you again next week. So until then, have a great week and we'll see you then.